All right, my friend. Or should I say, hi there, wanderer of the night who stumbled into this strange little corner of history, where the candles burn low and the truth smells faintly of dust, old makeup, and the kind of perfume that's supposed to hide rot, but only makes it more noticeable. You've made it here, to my table, to my voice, to my restless mind that refuses to let certain shadows slip into silence. And maybe, just maybe, you didn't come here for the polite, sterilized, picture book version of the past. No, I suspect you're here for the whispers, for the stains no one washed out, for the breath under the silk fan that wasn't sweet but metallic, sharp, and oddly familiar. Tell me, do you ever think about the things we've been taught to admire, but never truly examine? How many times have we watched a movie, a drama, an elegant scene of an Edo period geisha gliding through a paper screen hallway, her face a perfect porcelain moon, her lips a crimson crescent, her walk so deliberate it seems like she floats? We sigh, thinking it's beauty, but beauty is cruel. And beauty, especially the kind we have to keep feeding, is never clean. You see, there's something intoxicating about the gap between what we think we know and what actually happened. It's like sipping a cup of tea that has been steeped just a bit too long, pleasant at first, but then bitter in a way that sticks to your tongue. And tonight, I want to serve you exactly that kind of cup. You might sip it thinking it's jasmine, but you'll finish it knowing it's laced with lead, spit, and the perfume of lives that never had the luxury of soap. Ah, soap. Such a small thing, isn't it? A pale bar sitting quietly by the sink in your bathroom. A foam in your shower. We barely think about it. But imagine a world without it, not because they hadn't invented cleaning, but because cleaning wasn't the priority beauty demanded. Imagine a face powdered and lead white every morning until the skin beneath it becomes a quiet battlefield of rashes, sores, and slowly dying tissue. Imagine brushing your teeth not to whiten them, but to blacken them deliberately, staining them with a lacquer so they gleam like onyx when you smile, because in the strange poetry of the Edo, period white teeth were a sign of barbarism. And now imagine what it smelled like to press your cheek close to such a face. The heat of a summer night in Kyoto, the faint sweetness of rice powder, the sharp, dry tang of lead oxide, and underneath something less polite, the faint mustiness of fabric worn for too long, skin washed only in cold water without soap, and breath that carries the ghost of lacquer paint mixed with clove oil, trying to mask the rot. Tell me, does beauty still look the same to you now? I don't want you to think this is about disgust alone. No, this is about truth. And truth is rarely clean. It clings. It stays on your clothes like smoke. And the geisha, oh, they lived in that smoke. They mastered it. They made it part of their performance. The world saw them as living art, but that art came with a price, one paid in skin, lungs, and years. Because when you pull back the silk curtains of the tea house, when you walk past the laughter and the music and the soft shuffle of painted feet, you enter a backstage where beauty is built with dangerous tools. Lead-based face powder, known as ohaguro, ground fine as snow, sifted over a face until no hint of natural skin shows through. It's not just makeup, it's armor, it's identity. It's the mask you can't take off without also peeling away a little of yourself. And the more you wear it, the more it sinks into you, not in the romantic way, but in the way poison seeps into a bloodstream. So why lead? Because lead gave that cold, flawless whiteness that rice powder alone could never achieve. It clung to the skin, resisted the sweat, and reflected candlelight like moonlight trapped in a jar. But lead has a way of whispering to the body, soft and patient, until the whisper becomes a command. Headaches, fatigue, skin that refuses to heal. And yet, without it, you weren't beautiful enough. Then there were the teeth. The ohaguro, the blackening. At first glance, to us, it looks like decay, but to them, it was elegance. Married women, high-ranking courtesans, And geisha often stained their teeth with a mixture of iron filings, vinegar, and tannins from tea or sake. This lacquer, reapplied constantly, sealed the teeth and turned them black, not just as a fashion, but as a mark of sophistication. White teeth were associated with wild animals, demons, and peasants. Black teeth meant civilization, control, desire tamed and refined. But the cost? A mouth that tasted metallic every day, and gums that slowly surrendered to the acidic bite of the mixture. And the soap, or rather, the lack of it. In Edo, Japan, bathing was common. Public baths were a social ritual. But bathing didn't mean disinfecting. Soap was rare, expensive, and often avoided because it stripped the skin's oils, which were considered part of beauty. Instead, they rinsed with plain water, or with bran water from rinsing rice. It smoothed the skin, yes, but it also left traces of everything else. In the summer, sweat and powder mingled into a paste that clung to kimonos. In the winter, the body's warmth kept that paste alive. And so I have to ask you, if beauty is worth dying for, whose death are we applauding? Tonight, I'm going to take you into that world, not the romanticized one, but the one that smells of damp tatami mats and cosmetics that could kill you. The one where elegance was a performance that began long before the guests arrived, and lasted until long after they left, and where every painted smile hid a mouth that might taste of blood. You may find yourself torn, half enchanted, half repulsed. That's good. That means you're awake. And if you're awake, you're ready to walk with me through the streets of Edo, past the lantern-lit tea houses, into the private rooms where geisha sit before mirrors, painting themselves into existence with powders and pigments that will one day betray them. So, my friend, shall we open the door? Shall we step into the light that hides the shadows? Because once we start, there's no turning back. Under the faint amber glow of paper lanterns, Edo was not the still painting you've seen in museum prints. It was alive, breathing, sweating, its alleys exhaling steam in summer and sighing frost in winter. The geisha's world existed in that fragile border between light and shadow, where the air carried the mingled scent of damp wood, fish broth from a nearby food stall, and the perfumed ghost of incense burning in tea houses. And within this air, heavy with contradiction, lived women whose very survival depended on crafting an illusion so precise, so seamless, that it became a second skin one they could never peel away without peeling away themselves. To understand them, you have to imagine not the performance on the tatami floor, but the moments before it, when the audience had not yet arrived, and the mask had to be painted on slowly, deliberately, with substances that promised beauty but whispered decay. The morning ritual began not with sunlight, for sunlight was an enemy to the kind of complexion they required, but with the sound of water ladled into a wooden basin. It was cold, sometimes icy, because heat was reserved for tea, not the washing of the face. The geisha would bend over the water, splash her skin quickly to awaken it, then reach for the rice bran bag, soft and damp, pressing it into her cheeks and neck in slow circles. The bran's milky water left her skin faintly smooth, but not cleansed in the way you and I think of cleansing. The pores held their secrets, the scent of the previous night's sweat lingering beneath the thin film the bran left behind. And here is where the transformation began. A small porcelain bowl held the ohaguro, that deadly snow of white lead powder mixed with water into a paste so silky it seemed harmless. She would dip a flat brush into it, sweep it across her skin from hairline to jaw, covering every inch except for a deliberate crescent left bare at the nape of the neck, an erotic signal in Edo's silent language of desire. The sensation was at once cool and suffocating, as if a thin porcelain mask were being molded over her flesh. It hid redness, blotches, any hint of humanity, replacing it with a moonlit perfection that could only exist in the dim glow of candles. But beneath that calm white lay a skin slowly surrendering to the poison it absorbed day after day, cells weakening, capillaries breaking, a quiet rebellion under the stillness. By the time the paste dried, she was no longer herself in the mirror. She was the ideal, the image her patrons paid to see, the creation of a culture that equated pallor with refinement and refinement with worth. And yet, as she painted, her thoughts were not on worth, they were on survival. Because every layer of white was a step deeper into a game that did not allow retreat. Then came the mouth, the contrast without which the white meant nothing. A small dish of crushed safflower petals, mixed with beeswax, or, when she could afford it, cinnabar pigment, a vermilion so vivid it seemed pulse. The lips were not painted fully. That would have been too bold, too crude. Instead, a perfect small shape was brushed into the center of the mouth, a red bud blooming against the white expanse of her face. And here is the quiet tragedy. To preserve this effect, she often blackened her teeth with ohaguro, a mixture prepared with iron filings soaked in vinegar, steeped with tea leaves until the liquid turned as dark as ink. She would lean over the bowl, brush the lacquer onto her teeth, and let the metallic tongue fill her mouth, knowing it would seep into her gums and stain her breath with the scent of rust. This was not a casual choice. It was a necessity in her profession. A geisha with white teeth risked being mistaken for a country girl, unpolished, untrained. Black teeth spoke of discipline, of status, of knowing the codes of beauty that kept her in work. Yet it also meant a mouth that, over years, would grow tender, inflamed, sometimes unable to chew without pain. Still, she smiled when needed, the black shine catching the candlelight like wet lacquer on wood. Her hair, heavy with camellia oil, was sculpted into shapes so rigid they could last for days without being redone. The oil gave it a gloss like polished onyx, but also a faintly rancid scent when mixed with the warmth of the scalp and the trapped humidity of summer. To keep the hair's shape, she slept on a wooden pillowy takamakura that elevated her head enough to preserve the coiffure. This meant nights of shallow, uncomfortable rest, the neck stiff by morning, the dreams often cut short by a jolt of pain when her head slipped. And yet this too was part of the price. Comfort was for wives, for women who belonged to one man. A geisha belonged to the stage of her own life, and that stage did not close for sleep. The kimono came next, not just clothing, but armor. Layers upon layers, each one adding weight and heat, each one chosen for its seasonal appropriateness and the subtle messages in its patterns. The outermost layer was tied with an obi so stiff and wide it forced her to hold her posture, to move with deliberate, measured steps. Beneath the silk, her skin would grow damp, the lid powder mixing with sweat into a paste that slowly imprinted itself onto the lining. There was no washing these garments with soap would strip the silk. Instead, they were aired out, brushed, and returned to use, carrying with them the faint traces of every night they had witnessed. This was the silent accumulation of a career, the invisible archive of scents, powders, and the residue of countless evenings spent entertaining men who came seeking an escape from the ordinariness of their own lives. And here is the thing they never tell you about this world. Cleanliness was a performance, not a state. To the patrons, she was immaculate, untouched by the sweat of the street, the fish markets, the dust of the city. In reality, her world was full of cosmetic dust, tatami dust, the fine powder of rice bran, the gritty residue of lead that settled into the folds of fabric and the creases of skin. She bathed, yes, but bathing in the Edo sense meant rinsing in public baths, where steam and water were shared, where the same ladles passed from hand to hand, and where soap, if used at all, was rare, a luxury, not a habit. The skin was not stripped clean. It was refreshed, perfumed, prepared for the next layer of powder and oil. The idea was not to be clean in the modern sense, but to be pleasing to the eye, to the scent, to the fantasy each client carried. Outside, the city bustled. Merchants shouted, children played, Fishmongers dumped buckets of water into the street, sending a wave of briny air into the alleys. She would step into this world carefully, the white of her face shielded by a paper umbrella, the hem of her kimono lifted just enough to avoid the mud. People looked at her, not with the crude hunger reserved for lesser women, but with the curious respect given to someone who seemed to exist in a higher realm. That realm was an illusion, but it was one she wore well. Every breath she took tasted faintly of iron and powder. Every step was calculated to maintain the aura. And so as she approached the tea-house lanterns, swaying in the evening breeze, she carried within her all the contradictions of her profession, the beauty that poisoned, the cleanliness that concealed its own dirt, the elegance built on discomfort, the smile that hid a metallic towel. This was the first act of her night, a performance before the performance, a private labor invisible to those who only saw the final picture. And it is here in these unseen hours that the truth of the Edo Geisha's hygiene lies not in the romantic paintings but in the silent, steady erosion of the body beneath the mask and erosion she embraced because it was the only way to survive in a world that asked her to be both real and unreal at once. The door slides shut behind her with the softness of silk folding, and in that instant the street is gone, replaced by the cocoon of the Oshaya, the tea-house that smells faintly of sandalwood and tatami straw, warm from bodies that have already gathered, though the night is still young. Her feet, small beneath the weight of layered silk, barely disturb the quiet as she steps into the reception room. Yet every sound she makes is purposeful, the faint clink of her kanzashi, hair ornaments the rustle of her kimono, sleeves the whisper of her tabi socks against the polished floor. Here, even the air is different. Not the damp, raw breath of Edo's alleys, but an air that's been taught to behave, infused with incense and the ghost of yesterday's sake. She moves through it like a swimmer through water, feeling its drag and resistance, knowing every gesture will ripple. In this place, she is not simply a woman. She is a world arranged into human form, a set of careful illusions held together by muscle memory and habit, so ingrained it might as well be instinct. But those illusions have weight, and she feels them pressing into her skin with every heartbeat. A hostess greets her with a bow, eyes darting over her appearance in a silent appraisal that is both ritual and warning. Nothing out of place, nothing broken in the facade. The Oshiroi mask must hold. The vermilion bud of her lips must not smudge. The black gleam of her teeth must not fade before the first pour of sake. The hostess gestures, and she moves toward the zeshiki, the private room where her patrons wait. She knows the layout of these rooms, the way one knows the map of one's own veins. The placement of the low table, the alcove with its hanging scroll, the exact spot where she will kneel, so that the candlelight will catch her cheekbones just so, throwing her eyes into a darkness that men often mistake for mystery, rather than the shadow cast by exhaustion. Tonight's guests are already laughing, though their laughter has that brittle quality of men who are trying to drink the day out of their bones. She slides the door open, just enough to enter, bowing low, letting the obi dig into her ribs, her neck lowering until her chin almost touches the painted white of her chest. It's not humility they see, it's grace. And when she lifts her head, the candlelight clings to her like it has chosen her alone. They notice the white first, always the white. The skin like a flawless moon, the kind of surface onto which they can project anything desire, longing, control, because there is no flaw to contradict them. But what they don't notice, what they will never notice unless they press their fingers to her skin, is that beneath that surface, her pores are clogged with the same paste that is killing her by degrees. That the faint tightness they might feel in her cheek isn't from youth, but from the lead's quiet war against her body. She kneels at the table, pouring sake into their cups with hands that do not shake, though her fingers are tinged with the faint scent of camellia oil and lacquer from the ohaguro pot. The metallic tongue of her own mouth mixes with the steam from the sake, rising to meet her as she bends forward, but she smiles anyway, because the smile is part of the choreography. And when she speaks, her voice is low and warm, like a thread of silk unwinding in the dark, weaving itself into their ears until they lean closer without realizing it. She asks about their day, their work, their troubles, and as they answer, she laughs softly at the right moments. Her gaze linger just long enough to make each man feel as though the rest of the room has dissolved, leaving only the two of them. But the truth is, she sees them all at once, not as individuals, but as a single shifting entity she must navigate. Each has his own desires, his own vanity, his own threshold for illusion, and she must balance them like a tray of porcelain cups filled to the brim. A careless move and the sake will spill. A careless word, and the spell will break. She watches their hands, their eyes, the way their shoulders rise or fall with each drink, cataloging their moods the way a gambler reads cards. Her own hunger, both literal and otherwise, she tucks away, folding it into the part of herself she keeps for after the night ends. There is music eventually. The shamisen is brought in, its sound crisp and clean against the muffled warmth of conversation. She plays when asked, her fingers moving with a precision that belies the dull ache in her knuckles, the faint stiffness from nights spent sleeping on a wooden pillow. The strings bite into the tips of her fingers, but she knows how to hide that too. Her face is still, the music flowing as though from somewhere far removed from the body that produces it. In those moments, the men lean back, lulled, their eyes half closed, not with sleep, but with the pleasure of being held in a moment that feels crafted just for them. They do not think of the powder on her skin, the lacquer on her teeth, the oil in her hair, all of which have been chosen not for comfort, but for the way they hold the eye. As the night deepens, the air in the room grows heavy. The sake works its slow magic, loosening tongues, softening edges. Laughter becomes easier, movements less precise. She keeps pace, drinking just enough to share in the mood, never enough to let her edges blur. The men begin to speak of things they wouldn't in daylight, complaints about superiors, wistful mentions of lost loves, confessions they frame as jokes. She holds these secrets without reaction, storing them away like folded letters she will never read again. Her own truth stays hidden. The dryness in her throat from the lead, the slight swelling of her gums, the way her scalp itches beneath the weight of hair oil and pins, but must not be touched. When the final round is poured, when the candles have burned low, and the laughter has thinned to murmurs, she begins the slow retreat. Rising gracefully, bowing once more, she leaves them with the impression that the night has been theirs alone, that her beauty and attention were gifts given without cost. Outside the zashiki, she exhales not with relief, but with the awareness that the second act of her labor is about to begin, because the end of the performance is not the end of the work. The oshiroi must be removed, the kimono folded, the hair preserved for the next day. In her dressing room, she sits before the mirror again, but this time the reflection is harsher. Under the flickering lamplight, the white begins to break, to reveal the red beneath, the flush from the warmth of the room, the faint blotches where the lead has begun to irritate her skin. She takes a cloth, dips it into oil, and begins to wipe away the mask. The first stroke reveals a patch of bare skin, but the powder resists, clinging in the creases around her nose and eyes. She works patiently, each pass of the cloth a small reclamation, though the skin that emerges is not the skin she remembers from her youth. It is thinner now, less resilient, marked by the years of carrying another face over her own. The ohaguro is harder still. She rinses her mouth with warm water, spits into the basin, watches the dark liquid swirl and fade. The taste lingers, metallic and faintly bitter, a reminder that beauty has a taste, and it is never sweet. Her hair she leaves as it is, only adjusting the pins, because to redo it would mean hours of work the next day. The camellia oil scent is stronger now, freed from the heat of her scalp, mingling with the smell of the wooden pillow that waits for her. She undresses slowly, each layer peeled away, revealing another, until at last she is in her underrobe. The kimono are hung carefully, the obi rolled and stored. She folds her body onto the futon, positions the takamakura beneath her neck, and closes her eyes. Sleep comes in pieces, interrupted by the discomfort of the pillow, by the faint stickiness of skin not fully cleansed, by the memory of voices and laughter that echo in the quiet. And yet, in the space between waking and sleep, she feels the strange satisfaction of having survived another night. Tomorrow will bring another performance, another layering of powder and oil, another evening of careful gestures and measured words. The mask will return, and with it, the illusion. And though she knows that each night takes something from her, a little of her health, a little of her time, she also knows that in the world she inhabits, this is the only currency that matters. To give herself away, piece by piece, and to do it beautifully enough that no one notices the cost. Morning arrives not with the gentle touch of sunlight, but with the quiet persistence of sound. The city speaking in the language of beginnings, a bamboo ladle striking the rim of a basin somewhere in the courtyard, the faint scrape of a sandal on the stone path outside, the distant rattle of a cart's wooden wheels over uneven ground. She wakes in stages, consciousness moving through her body like ink spreading through water, the weight of the previous night still pressed into her bones. The wooden pillow has left its familiar ache along the nape of her neck, a dull reminder that beauty's demands reach even into sleep. Her hair, still shaped from the day before, smells faintly of camellia oil sweet at first, but with that quiet undertone of something that has lingered too long. The air in the room carries the chill of dawn, and when she pulls the quilt aside, the tatami exhales its dry, grassy scent, a smell she knows will follow her all her life, even in places far from here. She sits still for a moment, listening to the muted pulse of Edo, before the city is fully awake, and then she turns to the basin where the rice bran bag waits, its fabric swollen and pale from yesterday's use. The first touch of it against her cheek is cool, textured, the bran water seeping into her skin in small, slow breaths. It is not cleansing in the way the modern mind would demand. It does not strip. It soothes, leaving behind a faint film that both protects and traps. She presses it over her jaw, her temples, the soft curve beneath her ear, where last night's powder still clings in invisible traces. And in these motions there is both ritual and resignation. The mirror does not flatter her at this hour. It shows the fine net of tension at the corners of her eyes, the slight unevenness in tone along her cheekbones where the lid has begun to leave its quiet marks. But the mirror is not a place for judgment. It is the stage before the stage, and she has learned to meet her reflection with the detachment of a painter regarding a blank surface. The dresser arrives, her steps quiet but certain, carrying with her the tools of transformation. The shallow dish for oshiroi, the soft brushes, the small container of vermilion pigment, the pot of black lacquer for the teeth. They work in near silence. The only sounds the faint wet drag of brush on skin, the muted click of hairpins against the lacquered tray. The white comes first, cooling the skin in its first moment, then settling into that fine, even layer that hides the living warmth beneath. The lips are given their precise blossom of red, small enough to be suggestive, deliberate enough to be unmistakable. Then the ohaguro, its smell metallic and faintly sweet, its taste a shadow of earth and iron that will linger no matter how much tea she drinks. The hair is smoothed, parted, sculpted into the high, gleaming shape that marks her status, the pins sliding into place with the finality of locks on a door. By the time the obi is tied, her breath is subtly restricted, her waist drawn into the posture that will carry her through the day, and she is ready to leave. The streets are already in motion, vendors calling out the morning's offerings, the air carrying the layered scents of grilled fish, damp wood, and the faint musk of rain from the night before. She walks with the measured pace her garments dictate, the hems lifted just enough to avoid the damp patches along the road. Her paper umbrella angled to shield her face from the sun's early intrusion. Today's first destination is the public bath, not for cleansing in the modern sense, but for maintenance, a place to refresh the skin, to prepare it for the powders and paints that will follow. The bathhouse hums with voices, steam curling upward like ghost script on the air. She undresses with practiced discretion, folding each layer neatly, revealing the underrobe last before stepping into the washing area. The wooden stool is cool beneath her as she sits, ladling water over her shoulders, her knees, the hollow of her back. There is no soap, only the rice bran and cloth, the familiar milky water running in thin streams over her skin. Around her, women speak in soft bursts, their words rising and falling like the water's own rhythm, the sound of bodies being prepared for the day's demands. She scrubs her teeth with a twig dipped in tea, careful not to disturb the lacquer, the taste sharper now in the clean morning air. Back at her quarters, the second round of transformation begins. The white is applied again, thicker this time, the vermilion sharpened, the lacquer renewed until her teeth shine like polished obsidian. The kimono is heavier for evening silk, layered and patterned for the season, the obi wider, stiffer, but not complex enough to require another pair of hands. When she finally leaves for the tea house, the lanterns along the streets are just being lit, their glow spilling in gold pools onto the ground. Inside, the air is already warm with bodies and sake, the tatami soft beneath her knees as she takes her place. Tonight's guests are merchants from out of town, their voices carrying the slightly too loud confidence of men who have spent the day drinking. She pours for them, her hands steady despite the occasional sway of the low table under their movements. She listens as they speak of ships, of markets, of rumors from far provinces, nodding where it will please them, offering a small laugh where it will flatter. One asks for music, and she takes up the shamisen, her fingers finding the strings as naturally as breath. The notes are bright, quick at first, then softening into a slower rhythm that quiets the room's edges. She plays until the last note fades into the warm air, then sets the instrument aside, her gaze meeting each man's in turn, just long enough to leave the impression of intimacy, without the weight of commitment. As the night stretches, she keeps pace with their drinking, sipping just enough to join them without blurring her own focus. The laughter grows louder, the stories more embellished, and she knows exactly when to lean in, when to retreat, when to let silence settle like a soft cloth over the table. By the time they rise to leave, they are convinced the evening has been theirs alone, and she sees them out with the same measured grace she showed at their arrival. The walk home is slower, the lantern swaying above her, the night air cool and damp against her skin. In her room, she removes the pins one by one, the hair falling heavier with each release. The white comes away under the cloth in pale streaks, revealing the warmer tones beneath, the skin flushed at the temples, marked faintly where the powder sat too long. The red at her lips smears before it fades, the lacquer from her teeth rinsing into the basin, leaving behind only its memory and taste. She sits for a while in the quiet, her hair loose over her shoulders, her reflection unpainted but no less deliberate. Then she lies down, the wooden pillow fitting into its place beneath her neck, and closes her eyes, the city's hum settling into the slow rhythm of her breathing, carrying her toward another day that will begin just as this one did, with water, with white, with the careful construction of a face the world believes has always been hers. There are mornings when the light comes not as a blessing, but as an intrusion, slipping through the paper screens like a thief who has been invited in too many times, familiar enough to know exactly where the floor will creak under its weight. She wakes to it not with surprise, but with the slow stretch of someone pulling herself back from a shore she never fully reached in sleep, her body lodged halfway between exhaustion and readiness, as if both were states she has learned to hold at once. The pillow has left its signature at the base of her skull, a thin ache that pulses like an afterthought, and her hands instinctively move to smooth the hair that never fully loosened the oil, holding it in a kind of half-suspension. Outside, Edo is already restless, the morning traders calling to each other over the thump of crates, the soft percussion of sandals on packed dirt, the low hum of a city rehearsing its lines for the day. She draws back the quilt with the caution of one who knows that air can carry both relief and reminder. It greets her with a coolness that touches her skin like the fingers of someone she half remembers. The basin waits, its water catching the dim reflection of her face before the day has claimed it, and she crouches beside it, the rice bran bag damp and pliant in her grip. The scent rises again. That faint mixture of comfort can surrender, and she presses it to her cheek, moving in slow circles, feeling the grit of it whisper across her skin, a texture so familiar it has become invisible to her own awareness. In the mirror, the skin beneath her eyes tells small truths in a language only she can read, truths about nights spent speaking too much, smiling too much, keeping the posture of a woman who is never allowed to sag into herself. The dresser will arrive soon, and with her, the long conversation of transformation that requires no words. But before that, she gives herself the small rebellion of lingering, of letting the morning seep in without rushing toward the mask. On the low shelf sits the shamisen, its skin drawn tight, its voice still asleep, and she touches it briefly, feeling the tautness under her fingers, the quiet promise of sound that will later fill the gaps in men's sentences. There is also a small wooden box, the one she keeps not for valuables, but for scraps of life, too small for anyone else to notice. A hairpin with a crack in its lacquer that catches light in a strange way. A folded piece of paper that smells faintly of incense, and river wind, a button from a robe she no longer wears. These are not treasures in the conventional sense, but they are hers in a way so few things are. She closes the lid before the knock comes, before the day begins in earnest. The dresser is precise, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone who has tied more knots than most people have conversations. The white comes first, as it always does, cool against the skin, dragging ever so slightly where last night's fatigue still clings. The brush smooths it away into something the eye will accept as perfection, but she can feel the edges where the powder settles into the fine lines that no amount of youth or discipline can erase. The red follows, a bloom at the center of the lips, small and deliberate, and then the black, sealing her teeth once more into the lacquered smile that the night will demand. Hair is the longest ritual. Comb, oil, arrange, pin, each motion both a creation and a confinement. She does not flinch when the pins press against her scalp. The body learns to make room for discomfort until it becomes another kind of adornment. By the time she is dressed, the weight of the kimono has settled over her like a second gravity. The obi cinches her in, reminding her with every breath that elegance is a discipline of limits, that beauty is often the art of making difficulty look effortless. She steps outside into the gray hush of a day, still deciding whether it will rain, the air heavy with the kind of moisture that clings to skin and silk alike. The street feels narrower in this light, the colors muted, the edges softened, and she walks with the measured pace of someone who knows that haste would betray the architecture of her presence. Today's first engagement is not at a tea house, but at a private residence, one of the old merchant families who keep their wealth tucked into quiet corners and do not spend it loudly. The gate opens onto a garden where the stones are arranged as carefully as words in a love letter, and she follows the stepping path, feeling the damp rise through the soles of her sandals. Inside, the rooms smell faintly of cedar and something older, the air moving slowly as if reluctant to disturb the stillness. The gathering is small, only 3 men, their conversation already curling around the edges of business and memory. She kneels among them like a punctuation mark that changes the rhythm of their speech, pouring tea first, then sake, her hands steady, her gaze shifting just enough to catch each man in his own orbit. There is no music here, no formal performance, only the slow weave of talk and listening, the gentle push and pull of presence. She lets them speak, asks questions that draw them further, and when they answer, she listens with the kind of attention that makes them believe their words are more important than they are. This is a quieter skill than playing the shamisen or dancing, but it is one that earns its own kind of loyalty. Between the sips and the pauses, she feels the weight of the powder on her skin, the faint tug of the obi at her ribs, the metallic ghost of lacquer on her tongue. These sensations do not distract her. They anchor her, reminding her of the scaffolding that holds this moment together. When the visit ends, it is with the soft exchanges of gratitude and parting, a kind that carry the promise of future invitations. She steps back into the street, the light now stronger, the air thicker, and makes her way toward the next appointment. Along the way, she passes the incense shop, the herbalist, the bathhouse, each one a small landmark in the map of her days. She does not enter, but the sight of them threads into her awareness like beads on a string, reminders of the cycles that shape her life. By evening, she is once again in the warm, close air of a tea house, the lanterns casting their familiar glow, the rooms filled with the sound of voices layered over music. This night is more animated than the last, the guests louder, the laughter quicker to rise. She plays the shamisen when asked, the strings bright under her fingers, and dances once, the steps precise, the fan opening and closing like the breath of a bird. Between performances, she sits with the guests, pours drinks, listens, laughs, each gesture another stitch in the fabric of the evening. And yet, beneath the noise and the movement, she feels the quiet presence of her own endurance, the way it hums along the edges of her awareness. She knows how to keep the mask in place, even when the air grows stifling, when the kimono's weight presses harder, when the powder begins to mingle with the faint sheen of sweat at her temples. She knows how to let the hours pass without letting them see the toll they take. When the night finally draws to a close, she returns to her room, the door sliding shut behind her with the soft finality of a curtain falling. The ritual of undoing begins, the pins removed, the obi loosened, the layers peeled away, the white dissolved back into the cloth. She catches her reflection once more, the skin beneath showing the faint traces of the day's labor, and she touches her cheek lightly, as if to acknowledge the partnership between herself and the mask she wears. Then she lies down, the wooden pillow beneath her neck, and closes her eyes, knowing that morning will come again with the same insistence, and she will rise to meet it, as she always does, with the discipline of someone who has learned to make even the smallest survival look like grace. Night in Edo has a way of drawing its own borders, the lantern light pushing against the darkness like warm breath on glass, the streets narrowing into small rivers of shadow that wind between the low buildings. She moves through them with the steady rhythm of someone who knows not just where she is going, but how the very air will feel when she arrives, the weight of the evening pressing differently inside a tea house than outside in the uncurated city. The air beyond the threshold carries the tang of rain-soaked wood and horse sweat, the ghost of sake spilled in laughter. Inside, it is all controlled warmth, faint incense, and the thick scent of tatami that has swallowed years of footsteps and words. Her arrival is never loud. It's a thread being pulled into a tapestry already in motion, a quiet adjustment that the room accepts without comment, because the illusion of the evening depends on her being there. The hostess greets her eyes flicking briefly to take in every line of her appearance, the moon-pale mask of Oshiroi, the vermilion bloom on the lips, the hair smooth under the weight of pins and oil, and there is the smallest nod of satisfaction before she is led to her place. The guests tonight are different, younger, brasher, their laughter the sharp kind that cuts the air rather than folds into it. They wear their ambitions on their sleeves like newly printed crests, and they drink as though they can swallow their own futures. She knows this type well: men who want to be seen enjoying themselves, who mistake noise for presence, who will spend generously, but remember little of what they bought, except the feeling of being momentarily more than they are. Her task is different with them. It's not about coaxing out the silences or lending weight to their words. It's about speed, about keeping the rhythm high so they never notice the seams in the evening. She pours sake with precision, her hands steady even as the table rocks slightly under the force of their movements. She laughs when they demand. It lets her gaze flicker from one to the other in a way that makes each feel momentarily chosen. Spins small stories that are light enough to float above the noise, but sharp enough to land when needed. The shamisen is passed to her, and she plays faster than usual, the notes bright and quick, a cascade, rather than a stream, and she feels the sting in her fingertips where the strings bite. But the pain is an old companion, and does not slow her. There is a moment between songs when one of them leans closer, his breath thick with drink and the faint sweetness of pickled plums, and he tells her she has the kind of face that could make a man forget his own name. She smiles, tilts her head just enough for the pins to catch the light, and replies that names are useful for introductions, but not for memories. He laughs, not quite sure if she has agreed with him or not, and that is enough. The game moves on. She knows how to dance in words, without ever stepping into the center of the floor. The night stretches, elastic with drink and heat, until the edges of the room begin to blur for them. She keeps her own edges sharp, sipping only enough to be part of their world without letting it claim her. When the last cup is poured and the last toast made, she rises with them, bows, and lets them leave first, a sound of their laughter spilling into the street, like a cart overloaded with goods. Only then does she step outside, the air cool against the heat that has built in her skin. The walk back is quieter now, the streets mostly empty, except for the occasional figure hurrying home or lingering in a doorway. She lets her pace slow, the weight of the kimono pulling gently at her shoulders, the faint ache in her jaw reminding her of the smile she has worn for hours. By the time she reaches her room, the night has wrapped itself around her like a second robe, heavy but familiar. She slides the door closed, unpins her hair, and feels the relief ripple through her scalp, the strands falling like a curtain finally dropped. The oshirai comes away under the cloth, revealing the skin beneath, flushed in some places, pale in others, the texture uneven, where the lead has begun to etch its slow pattern. The red from her lips fades into the water in the basin, blooming briefly before dissolving entirely. She sits for a moment in the quiet, the lamp casting a soft pool of light that touches only the edge of her futon, and the shamisen resting against the wall. Her fingers ache faintly from playing, and she traces the strings without sound, feeling the vibration in her skin rather than hearing it. There is a strange intimacy in this silence, as though the room knows her better now that it has seen her without the layers. She lies down, the wooden pillow fitting into the familiar place beneath her neck, and lets her eyes close. Sleep will come in fragments, as it always does, but the stillness between those fragments is enough. Outside, the city settles into its own uneasy rest, the lanterns guttering one by one, the streets exhaling the day. And in the narrow space between exhaustion and renewal, she breathes, not as the geisha they saw tonight, but as herself unnamed, unpainted, still here. Dawn comes like a reluctant apology, spilling through the shiji with the color of watered-down rice wine, soft but insistent, touching her eyelids before she's ready to open them. She has learned not to resent the light. Resentment is a luxury for those whose bodies are free to choose their own pace. For her, the day's first breath is already part of the choreography, another step in the unbroken chain that loops night into morning, performance into preparation. She sits up slowly, her hair still holding the faint architecture of last night's pins, a ghost structure without its scaffolding, smelling faintly of camellia oil and the warmth of her own skin. The room is quiet except for the faint sigh of the tatami under her shifting weight. and for a moment she allows herself to simply exist in that small, rare pocket before the work of beauty begins again. But the mirror waits, as it always does, and when she looks into it, she doesn't search for herself. She searches for the canvas she will offer to others. The rice bran water is already prepared in the shallow basin, the cloth bag floating like some patient, pale creature waiting to be put to use. She kneels, takes it in her hand, and begins the familiar motion, pressing it gently against her skin, moving in practiced circles that never hurry. The scent rises again, that blend of grain and faint sweetness, a smell that lives halfway between food and ritual, comfort and surrender. The bran water will leave her skin faintly smooth, yes, but it will not erase the memory. Her flesh carries of lead settling into pores, of lacquer brushing over enamel of nights, thick with candle heat and the weight of watching eyes. When the dresser arrives, the silence between them is almost companionable. They speak little. The tools in the dresser's hands do all the talking. The brush dips into the white paste and draws it across her skin with the certainty of someone painting, a mask they've painted 100 times before. The cool touch is fleeting. The weight of it settles almost immediately, as though the powder knows its role and clings without question. She does not flinch when it reaches the tender skin near her eyes, though there is a faint pull, the kind that reminds her she is being reshaped. The lips come next to red no fruit has ever grown, concentrated into the precise shape that tradition demands, and then the slow, inevitable blackening of her teeth. The taste is as it always is, iron and earth, and a strange, almost medicinal bitterness that lingers even after the mouth is rinsed. She accepts it without thought. Resistance would be as pointless as objecting to the weather. The hair is the longest labor, and perhaps the most unforgiving. Combs slide through the strands, coaxing them into the exact form expected of her rank and role. Oil smooths every rebel hair into submission, and the pins are placed not just for beauty, but for endurance. They must hold through hours of movement, through the slow heat of the room, through the subtle tilts of her head as she listens and laughs and pours. By the time the obi is tied tight enough to shape her posture, wide enough to remind her of its presence with every breath, she is ready to step into the day's first engagement. This one is in a district where the streets feel closer, the buildings leaning toward each other like conspirators. The air smells faintly of charcoal and miso, and the voices of vendors float over the narrow road like a threadbare banner that has survived too many seasons. She walks at a pace that belongs to no one but her, slow enough to keep the fabric from wrinkling, steady enough to project the gravity her appearance demands. When she arrives, the tea house is already warm with the presence of its guests. The hostess leads her through the maze of low-lit rooms, past the faint clatter of cups and the hushed conversations that pause for just a breath as she passes. The men she joins today are older, their laughter quieter, their sake cups lifted with a kind of care that suggests they are measuring not just their drink, but the moment itself. With them, the work is subtler, the gesture smaller. She listens more than she speaks, offering comments like folded paper light enough to float, precise enough to hold meaning when opened. She pours for each of them, not just the liquid, but the ease they've come for, the sense that this space exists outside the weight of the world. When one asks for music, she plays softly, the shamisen notes falling like a thin rain on still water, each sound disappearing into the room before it can echo. The hours pass in their quiet way, and when the gathering ends, she leaves without hurry, her steps carrying her back into the daylight. The streets are busier now, but she walks as though untouched by their noise, her mind already leaning toward the evening to come. There will be another engagement, one that demands more sparkle, more laughter, more deliberate charm. She returns to her quarters for a brief pause removes the outermost layer of her kimono to rest her shoulders, drinks a cup of barley tea that cools her mouth, but cannot erase the metallic ghost of the lacquer. When night begins to lean in, she dresses again, adjusting each layer until it falls exactly as it should. The lanterns are lit along the streets, their light pooling in small golden circles on the ground, and she moves through them like a figure in a painted scroll. The tea house tonight is lively, the guests already laughing loudly, the air thick with sake and anticipation. She joins them with practiced ease, letting their energy fold around her. The shamisen is in her hands before long, the rhythm quick and playful, her voice rising to match theirs. She pours, she listens, she tilts her head just so, and they respond as they always do, leaning closer, speaking more freely, convinced that the attention they receive is singular. But beneath the mask, the small truths remain: the weight of the powder on her skin, the faint ache at the base of her skull from the pins, the tight band of the obi around her ribs. She carries these things without showing them, because to reveal them would be to break the illusion, and the illusion is what keeps her here, night after night, in the warm, shifting glow of the room. When the evening ends, she returns to her quarters once more, unpins her hair, wipes away the mask, and looks at herself in the mirror. The skin is flushed where the powder has been removed, the lines at the corners of her mouth a little deeper from the hours of smiling. She touches her cheek lightly, as if in quiet acknowledgement, and then lies down, the wooden pillow beneath her neck, ready to begin again when the dawn comes, soft and unyielding as ever. There are nights when the city hums like a low string, pulled taut across the sky, the sound not loud, but inescapable, vibrating in the walls, in the soles of her feet, in the small hollow between her collarbones, where the first drop of sake will warm its way down. Tonight is such a night, and she feels it even before she leaves her quarters. The air thick in that particular way Edo has when the weather can't decide whether to rain or to hold itself back out of spite. She steps outside into streets already dressed in lantern light, the reds and golds trembling with each small wind, casting shadows that sway like restless thoughts along the paper walls. There's an ache behind her eyes, not quite pain, more like a warning note she has learned to ignore, a reminder that the lead white mask is not just a thing she wears, but a thing that has learned to live inside her, in her blood, in the way her fingers sometimes forget their surety when she strings the shamisen. Still, the brush has done its work tonight, smoothing the paste across her skin until the mirror could be fooled into believing it has always been this pale, always been this still. The lips are their precise vermilion, the teeth their deliberate darkness, the hair a sculpture held aloft by pins that press like cold promises against her scalp. The tea house she enters is louder than most, the sound swelling and collapsing like waves against a narrow shore. The guests here are half strangers, half familiar, a mix of men who know how the night works, and men who believe they are here for something entirely unique. She greets them all as though they are singular, each bow angled perfectly to the measure of their station, each smile tuned to their appetite for attention. The room smells of sweet sake, grilled river fish, and the faint incense that clings to the hostess like an invisible shawl. She kneels at her place, the silk of her kimono folding into itself with the precision of origami, and begins the work that will never be called work to its face. The first man she pours for is the kind who wears his confidence like armor, broad gestures, quick laughter, the kind of gaze that wants to rest on her too long. She lets him think it's welcome, lets him believe the way her eyes hold his, for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, is something earned, when in truth it is only given. The second is quieter, his conversation more careful, each sentence offered as though it is a delicate item that might break if she doesn't handle it correctly. For him, she listens longer, lets silence fill the space without rushing to patch it. The third barely speaks at all, his attention drifting to the music before the shamisen is even in her hands. She plays for him, the notes clean and deliberate, each one landing softly enough to keep the room from noticing they are meant for one listener alone. Between the laughter, the pouring, the measured touches of fan to cheek, she feels the way the powder shifts on her skin under the heat of the room, the way The obi reminds her ribs not to swell too greedily with air. The lacquer on her teeth is beginning to leave its faint metallic taste again, a ghost flavor that makes every sip of sake a strange combination of earth and sweetness. She has learned to drink without letting her tongue touch the inside of her teeth too often. Small tricks keep the illusion clean. When the night reaches that middle place where the guests are loosened, but not yet spent, she dances. The steps are slow at first, the fan in her hand an extension of her breath, opening and closing with the precision of a heartbeat. The music coils around her, the room dimming at its edges, until all she sees are the shifting expressions on the faces watching her. Curiosity, hunger, amusement, something softer she does not name. When she finishes, there is the soft rush of applause, not the wild kind, but enough to tell her the spell has held. Later, as the night leans toward its end, she is asked for a story. She chooses one that moves gently, a tale about a bridge that only appears at dusk, and the lovers who meet there not to declare themselves, but to part without bitterness. Her voice is steady low, the kind that draws people in without making them realize they've leaned forward. The story ends as the candles burn low, and she feels the shift in the room, the small sigh of satisfaction that means they are ready to release the night. When they leave, she walks behind the hostess through the quiet corridors, the laughter fading into memory almost as soon as it passes her ears. Outside, the air has cooled, and the city's hum is softer now, like a song that has forgotten some of its words. Her steps are slower, not from fatigue alone, but from the knowledge that once she slides her door closed, the unmaking will begin. Back in her quarters, she sits before the mirror and begins to peel the night from her skin. The cloth takes the white away in streaks, each pass revealing the warmer tones beneath, the faint marks where the mask is pressed too long. The red at her lips smears before it fades, leaving a thin shadow of itself, like a memory unwilling to let go. She rinses her mouth, the dark water spiraling into the basin, carrying with it the taste of the evening's conversations, the sharpness of sake, the metallic whisper of the lacquer. Her hair is last, the pins set carefully aside, the oil-slick strands loosening into something that feels more like her own. She sits for a moment in the quiet, her fingers idly combing through her hair, the room smelling faintly now of camellia and the starch of her bedding. The wooden pillow waits, its shape as unyielding as always, but she doesn't lie down yet. Instead, she watches her reflection, the version of herself that exists only in this small space between masks, and sleep and wonders, briefly, how many nights it takes before the woman in the glass becomes more familiar than the one in the white. When she finally lies down, the pillow cradling the base of her skull, her breath evens out, and the city's hum fades entirely. In the darkness behind her closed eyes, the world of lantern light and laughter feels far away, and the only thing left is the soft, steady rhythm of her own breathing, carrying her toward another dawn she will meet with the same quiet precision, the same practiced grace, the same unshakable knowledge that survival can look an awful lot like art. Some nights seem to begin before the sun has even finished setting, as if the city itself is impatient, tugging at her sleeve to pull her into the warm blur of its evening pulse. She sits before the mirror, the last trace of daylight slipping through the she and catching along the curve of her jaw, highlighting for a brief moment the skin before the white takes it away. The basin water is cool against her fingers, the rice bran bag soft with use, and she works it across her face in quiet, circles knowing it will not erase the faint unevenness beneath her eyes, the tiny reminders of nights that have stacked themselves like coins in the drawer of her body. When the dresser begins her work, they don't speak, but the silence is not empty. It's threaded with the soft scratch of the brush against the porcelain bowl, the measured tap as paste is readied, the familiar sound of transformation, beginning its climb from bare skin to the pale, deliberate mask. The white settles over her face like an agreement, cool at first, then weightier, like a promise she has no choice but to keep. The lips bloom into their careful red. The teeth slip into their lacquered darkness. The hair is smooth and sculpted the pins, locking it into a shape that will not falter under the heat of the room or the lean of a man's gaze. The night's engagement is with a merchant from Osaka, a man who has sent word ahead that he wants something memorable. She knows what that means. It is not a request for novelty, but for precision, for the kind of evening that feels both unique and entirely as expected, as if she has read his mind and arranged the night to match the story he will later tell himself. The tea house is quieter than some, its light softer, the scent of cedar and faint incense meeting her at the entrance like an old acquaintance. She kneels in the reception room, her bow deep enough to acknowledge his distance and his cooing, and when she lifts her head, she meets his eyes for just a breath, longer than necessary. His face is round, the lines of it carved more by success than by hardship, but his hands, resting on the low table, are restless, fingers tapping against the lacquer as if counting something invisible. They begin with sake, the first pour as deliberate as the first step onto a bridge. She lets him speak, and his words are those of a man used to filling rooms. But beneath them, she hears the faint edge of someone measuring how much of himself to give away. She answers in the rhythm he offers, her laughter folded into the right places, her gaze shifting to the other guests when needed, but always returning to him as though pulled by an unseen thread. When the shamisen is brought in, she plays with a steadiness that allows him to lean into the music without realizing he is doing it, her fingers sure on the strings even as they ache faintly from the earlier hours of practice. Later, he asks for a story, and she chooses one about a traveling peddler who sold mirrors in villages where no one had ever seen their own face. She tells it slowly, letting the pauses between words open wide enough for him to step into them, her voice low and even, the room's edges softening around them. He watches her with the kind of attention that men mistake for connection, not realizing that what they're feeling is the reflection she's offering them. When the food comes grilled ayu, its skin blistered and glistening, she serves him first, the steam carrying the faint scent of the river it once swam in. He remarks on the delicacy, and she nods, but inside she is measuring the way the heat from the dish mixes with the faint warmth of the room, the way it will press against the powder on her skin, testing its hold. She adjusts her posture slightly, keeping her neck straight so the hairline remains clean, the curve of her back speaking the language her lips do not. As the night deepens, his laughter loosens, and the tapping of his fingers on the table fades. He begins to speak less of himself and more of other things, places he has traveled, faces he remembers. She listens, knowing that listening is often the rarest luxury she can offer. When he grows quiet, she lets the silence sit without rushing to fill it. And in that stillness, she feels the shift, the moment when the evening has moved from transaction to memory. When they part, his bow is deeper than when they began, and his eyes hold a softness that was not there before. She steps back into the night air, the coolness of it slipping under the color of her kimono, reminding her that the world outside the tea house is larger, rougher, less rehearsed. The streets are quiet now, the lanterns swaying gently in the breeze, their light touching the ground in pale, uneven circles. She walks slowly, the weight of the kimono and the obi pressing into her shoulders and ribs, the faint metallic taste of lacquer still at the back of her tongue. Back in her quarters, she removes the pins first, each one releasing a small tension she hadn't realized she was holding. The hair falls heavier than she expects, the oil scent rising with the warmth of her scalp. She wipes away the white in long, steady strokes, watching the face beneath reappear piece by piece, warmer in tone, but marked by the hours it has spent beneath the mask. The red smears easily, the darkness from her teeth takes longer to rinse away, and the taste lingers even after the basin water has run clear. She sits for a while with her hair loose, the mirror reflecting a face she sees only in these brief windows between one performance and the next. It is not untouched, There are faint shadows under the eyes, a small dryness at the corners of the mouth, but it is hers, unlit by lanterns, unmeasured by the eyes of strangers. She breathes in the quiet, the air of the room carrying only the scents of camellia oil and tatami, and she feels the shape of herself settle back into place. When she finally lies down, the wooden pillow meeting the base of her skull, she closes her eyes and lets the night fall away. Outside, the wind moves through the narrow streets, carrying with it the faint rattle of shutters, the soft splash of water somewhere unseen. She listens until the sounds blur, until they are no longer street or wind or water, but simply the hum of the city in its sleep. And in that hum, she drifts, knowing that tomorrow will come with its own mask, its own music, its own set of eyes to meet, and that she will meet it, as she always does, with the quiet precision of someone who has long since learned how to turn survival into a kind of art. There are mornings when the basin water looks colder than it is when its still surface holds a pale, distorted reflection of her face, the white not yet applied, but already hovering in the way her features brace themselves for it. She leans forward, the sleeves of her underrobe falling like slow water toward the tatami, and dips the rice bran bag into the basin. The soft grit releases its faint scent, that familiar breath of grain and damp, and she presses it against her cheek with a patience that feels older than she is. The dresser will be here soon, and with her, a careful layering of everything the day will demand. But for now, she moves in silence, tracing each small curve of her face as though mapping a country that keeps changing its borders. The mirror catches her eyes, and in them, there rests the glint of someone who knows this is the only part of the day she fully owns. The quiet before the brush meets the skin, before her breath must be measured to match the might of silk and the arc of another's expectations. When the dresser begins her work, there's no need for words. The brush dips into the porcelain bowl, lifts and draws the white across her face with a coolness that is almost merciful at first, before it settles into the skin like a polite trespasser who intends to stay. The lips are shaped into their vermilion bloom, the teeth sealed into their deliberate darkness, the hair drawn tight and pinned until it feels less like adornment and more like architecture. By the time the obi is tied, pressing into her ribs with its familiar discipline, she is no longer the woman who pressed the bran to her cheeks. She is the figure the night will expect. Her first engagement takes her across the district, the streets narrowing and widening like breaths, the morning market still clinging to its scent of fish and charcoal. The tea house here is older, its wood worn smooth by decades of hands and seasons. And inside, the air moves slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the history held in its walls. The guests are already seated, their conversation a low hum, the kind that asks to be joined without being interrupted. She kneels, pours, listens, lets her gaze rest lightly on each man in turn, adjusting her posture and tone to the subtle shifts in their attention. The shamisen sits at her side until the moment feels right, and then her fingers are on the strings, coaxing out a melody that drapes itself over the room like soft cloth, filling the spaces between words. Hours pass in that gentle rhythm, and when she leaves, it is with a kind of farewell that promises the door will open for her again. The streets are busier now, and she walks at her own measured pace. The weight of the kimono, a constant reminder that she carries both herself and the role she wears. She stops briefly at the incense shop, letting the owner show her a new blend, something green and sharp, meant for spring. She buys only a small packet, tucking it into her sleeve, knowing she'll save it for a night when the air feels too heavy and needs to be cut. By evening, she is dressed again, the layers fresh, but the weight the same, the white mask remade, the pins set in their exact places. Tonight's guests are a mix of merchants and a visiting poet, their voices rising and falling in a pattern that keeps her attentive. The merchants talk numbers and deals, their laughter quick and transactional. The poet speaks less, but when he does, his words have the kind of weight that pulls the air toward them. She listens to both kinds, knowing that each demands a different kind of answer. With the merchants, she is quick, bright, letting her laughter fold easily into theirs. With the poet, she is slower, her gaze steady, her words carrying a softness that invites his to linger. The shamisen is in her hands again before long, the music bright for the merchants, then gentler for the poet, her fingers shifting effortlessly between tempos. She feels the ache in them, the faint stiffness from the morning's playing, but the sound does not falter. The room's heat presses against the powder on her skin, and she adjusts her movements so the illusion holds, each turn of her head deliberate, each smile controlled. When the evening finally unwinds, the farewells are warm, the poet's bow deeper than the rest. She steps back into the night air, the lantern light trembling on the wet street, and begins the walk home. The coolness slides under her collar, lifting the last of the evening's heat from her skin. Back in her quarters, she unpins her hair, the strands falling heavy and warm against her back, the oil scent rising in the quiet. The white comes away in long strokes, revealing the warmer tones beneath, the faint marks at the edges where it has pressed too long. The red at her lips fades into the cloth. The darkness from her teeth takes longer to rinse, leaving its metallic ghost behind. She sits for a moment with her hair loose, the mirror reflecting a face she knows only in these brief hours between one mask and the next. It is not untouched. There is a trace of the night in the slight dryness at her mouth, in the shadows under her eyes, but it is hers. She breathes in the scent of camellia oil and tatami, the soft creak of the floor under her shifting weight, and lets the quiet settle over her like a second skin. When she lies down, the wooden pillow fitting into the familiar place beneath her neck, the city outside is already slipping toward sleep, its sounds thinning into the occasional rattle of wind against shutters. She closes her eyes, knowing that dawn will come again, and with it, the water, the bran, the brush, the mask, and that she will meet it all with the same precision, the same grace, the same unbroken thread that has carried her through every night before. There is a particular stillness to Edo in the hours before dawn, a kind of held breath, as though the city itself is listening for something that may or may not come. It's in that stillness she wakes, not because she is rested, but because the body has its own clock, one that ticks in time with the weight of silk, the pull of pins, the taste of lacquer. The room is dim, the air cool enough to make the basin's water shiver when she dips her fingers in. She presses the rice bran bag to her face, feeling the faint grit trace, small circles over skin that knows too well the sensation of being covered and uncovered, painted and unpainted day after day, until the bare self becomes less familiar than the one in white. The mirror shows her what it always shows her in these early hours. A face neither entirely hers, nor entirely the mask's sea. A liminal version that belongs to the moments between performance and preparation. She studies it briefly, not with vanity, but with the detached attention of someone checking the condition of a tool before using it again. The dresser arrives with the soft efficiency of habit, her presence announced only by the sound of fabric shifting in the doorway. They speak little. Words are unnecessary in a ritual this old. The brush lifts, dips, and begins its work, the cool paste spreading over her skin, covering warmth with pallor, turning every line and curve into something that could have stepped out of a painted scroll. The vermilion lips follow, a careful bloom in the center of her mouth, the blackened teeth sealing the transformation. The hair is smooth, oiled, shaped, pinned the pressure of each pin, a quiet reminder that beauty here is not light, it is weight. The obi is tied, pulling her ribs into a posture that will be read as grace by those who have never had to hold it for hours. The day as first engagement is an unusual one. A private gathering in a small garden pavilion just outside the city. The path there winds past quiet houses and stretches of open field, where the morning mist clings to the grass like something reluctant to let go. The pavilion is simple but elegant, the tatami freshly brushed, The sliding doors open to the sound of the stream nearby. The guests are few, their voices low, their laughter understated. She moves among them as she always does, pouring tea, offering the small, precise gestures that give a gathering its shape. The shamisen rests against her knee when she plays, the notes drifting out into the open air and mixing with the sound of the water, each one disappearing into the distance without echo. Here, the air feels lighter, but the mask does not. The powder still sits on her skin like a thin wall between her and the world. When the gathering ends, the walk back feels longer than the walk there. The city slowly reclaiming her as she re-enters its narrower streets, the market noise rising like a tide. She returns to her quarters for a brief rest, loosening the obi, but not removing it entirely, sipping barley tea that cools her mouth, but does not erase the faint metallic ghost left by the lacquer. Outside, the light tilts toward afternoon, and with it comes the slow turning of her mind toward the night. The evening engagement is in one of the more prestigious tea houses, the kind where the rooms are always warm, and the guests always expect the night to bend perfectly to their desires. Tonight's group is a mix, an older patron whose presence is steady and unhurried, a younger man with the quick laughter of someone eager to prove himself, and two others who drift between conversation and silence, as though deciding which suits them better. She reads them quickly, adjusting her pace to theirs. The older man gets the quiet weight of her attention, the younger the quick spark of her laughter, the others the kind of gentle prompting that lets them find their own rhythm. When she plays the shamisen, she chooses songs that shift subtly, keeping the energy of the room balanced. The strings bite at her fingertips, but she does not let it show. The heat of the room begins to press against the powder on her skin, and she adjusts her posture so it does not crack, turning her head in ways that keep the light flattering and the illusion intact. The cups are poured and repowered, the conversation looping and branching, the air thickening with the combined warmth of bodies and sake. At some point, the younger man asks for a dance, and she rises smoothly, the silk of her kimono whispering against itself. The fan opens in her hand, each movement a line drawn in the air, the steps deliberate, measured, the room narrowing until it is only her and the circle of their eyes. She feels the weight of their attention as tangibly as she feels the weight of the obi, and she uses its shaping, the final bow, so that it leaves the room in a brief reverent silence before the applause begins. The night winds down as all nights do, the energy tapering, the laughter softening. She takes her leave with the same grace she arrived, the bow deep enough to close the evening, but not so deep as to end the memory of it. Outside, the air is cool, the lantern light trembling in the breeze. The streets are quieter now, and her steps slow as she nears her quarters, as if to prolong the space between the roll and the unmaking of it. Inside, the first pins come out of her hair, each one releasing a small pulse of relief. The strands fall heavier with each release, the oil scent rising warm into the quiet. She wipes away the white in long strokes, revealing the skin beneath in gradual, uneven patches, the lines at the edges of her mouth deeper, now from the hours of controlled smiling. The red fades easily, the black from her teeth takes longer, the taste lingering even after the water in the basin runs clear. She sits for a while with her hair loose, her face bare, the mirror reflecting someone she only sees in these hours between one performance and the next. There is no audience here, no mask, only the soft creak of the tatami and the faint scent of camellia oil. When she lies down, the wooden pillow fitting into its familiar place, she closes her eyes and lets the city fade to a hum outside her walls. She knows that tomorrow will begin in the same way it always does, with water, with rice bran, with the brush, with the white, and that she will meet it as she has met every day before, with the quiet, deliberate grace of someone who has turned endurance into a kind of art that no one claps for, but everyone depends on. There is a moment long after the lanterns have burned low, and the night as last footsteps have faded into the ribs of the city. When the silence is so complete, it feels almost solid, like a layer of glass laid over the world. She lies beneath it, eyes open, feeling the weight of her own breathing against the wooden pillow, her hair still, faintly warm from the day's oil. The faint pressure of the obi gone, but the memory of its grip still circling her waist like an echo. This is the hour that does not belong to anyone else, not to the men who have watched her laugh, not to the rooms that have held her voice, not to the mask that has kept her separate from herself. In this hour, she is neither geisha nor ghost of one. She is simply a woman lying in a quiet room. The city is home, now distant enough to be mistaken for the rush of blood in her ears. But even here, in the privacy of this stillness, she knows the ritual will begin again when the light returns, that the basin will wait with its cool water, that the rice bran bag will hang like a pale fruit ready to be crushed into her skin, that the white will climb back over her face until the bare self is hidden once more. It is not resignation she feels, nor quite acceptance. It is something in between, a steady knowledge that this repetition is both the chain and the lifeline, the thing that binds her and the thing that allows her to endure. She thinks sometimes of the first time the brush touched her skin, how she had flinched at the chill, how the weight of the paste had surprised her, how the mirror had shown her not herself, but a stranger with her features, a stranger whose stillness seemed deeper than hers had ever been. Back then, she thought the transformation was a kind of magic. Now she understands it is more like carpentry, an art of precision, angles, and weight, of building a facade that will hold through heat and candlelight, and the nearness of others. The magic is only in how well it conceals the scaffolding beneath. And yet, there are days when the mask feels less like a covering and more like a second skin, one she has grown into so completely that the bare face in the mirror at night feels almost borrowed. She wonders, in moments when her thoughts are allowed to wander, which one the world would miss if she were gone, the woman in white or the one beneath it. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying with it the faintest scent of rain, and she remembers nights when the air in the tea house grew so heavy the powder began to slip, when she had to move slower, tilt her head differently, keep the light always falling where the surface was smoothest. She remembers the first time a patron had looked too closely and asked if she was unwell, the way her smile had stretched a little too tight in the answer. She remembers the ache in her jaw on nights when the laughter had to be quick and frequent, the way the lacquer on her teeth turned every sip into a reminder. And yet, she also remembers the weightless moments, the hush in a room when the last note of her shamashun hung in the air, the flicker in a guest's eyes when a story landed exactly where she meant it to, the quiet bows at the end of an evening when words were unnecessary. Those are the moments that keep her returning to the basin each morning, moments that make the hours of wait and heat and stillness seem like an offering rather than a tax. She rises from the futon and crosses to the mirror, not to begin the ritual yet, but to see herself in the half-light before the mask. The skin here is not flawless. There are faint shadows, small lines at the corners of her mouth, a slight unevenness where the lead has done its slow work, but it is honest. She touches her cheek, feeling the warmth beneath her fingertips, the pulse there steady and stubborn, and she allows herself to linger in the reflection before turning away. The room smells faintly of camellia oil and tatami, the familiar scent of home even if the hours she spends here awake are few. She pours tea, drinks it slowly, lets the bitterness sit on her tongue before it fades. When the light grows stronger, she begins. The water is cool again, the rice bran softening in her hand, the circles over her skin small and deliberate. But as the paste settles, and the red blooms and the black seals, she carries with her the memory of the face in the half-light, the one no one else sees. She carries it into the tea house, into the rooms where the air is warm, and the eyes are watching, into the music and the laughter and the careful turns of her head. And though she knows the night will take it from her again, she also knows it will be waiting in the mirror when she returns, as it has every night before. Perhaps that is the quiet truth of her life, that survival is not in choosing between the mask and the self, but in holding them both, in learning to let each have its hour. The guests will remember the woman in white, the perfect stillness, the measured voice, the art that seems effortless. She will remember the other one, the one who breathes in the dark while the city sleeps, who feels the wind shift through the shchi, who drinks her tea in silence. And between them, she will continue morning to night to morning, turning each repetition into something that can be mistaken for grace. So when you think of her, think not only of the lantern light catching the curve of her cheek, not only of the music spilling from her fingers, not only of the bow that closes an evening. Think also of the basin in the early light, of the quiet space before the first brushstroke, of the moment when she lies down and the city fades. Think of the way a life can be both performance and truth at once, if lived with enough precision. And if you find yourself here again tomorrow, I'll tell you another story, perhaps about a different night, a different mask, a different way the world teaches someone to survive. Until then, rest your eyes, keep your own small rituals, and remember that even the quietest endurance can be its own kind of beauty. Will you come back? Or will you, like the guests who leave the tea house, carry only the version you are meant to see? That is for you to decide.